A hidden cave in Idaho reveals a corpse.
It could have been killed by decapitation, or decapitation came afterward.
I think it takes a lot to destroy a body like that.
And a tragic family tale.
So his family were Mormon settlers.
Yeah.
Of murder on the American frontier.
This case has the tone of something completely different.
Murder is a crime as old as time.
We've got the skeleton here. What can the bones tell us?
In some cases,
We've got a crime scene at 10,000 feet.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
have been unsolved for centuries.
It's a mystery.
He had his knees sticking up like this.
You have here his head?
Now, archaeological geneticist Professor Turi King
It tells us something about our past.
and top homicide cop Rod Demery
I've seen hundreds of murders, and it's all about putting that puzzle together with the evidence.
are finally unearthing the truth
So this could be an axe?
Sure.
buried in these ancient mysteries.
Whether it's now or 1,500 years ago, I still want to know what made this person do what they did. I've never been to Idaho before in my life, and in fact, I never thought I'd ever come to Idaho. This is the farthest north you can get in the United States, and I lived in the farthest south you can get.
Former homicide detective Rod Demery is in a state renowned for its wilderness and stunning landscapes. He's investigating the mystery surrounding an unsolved murder. Home to Native American tribes for thousands of years. In the 19th century, the Oregon Trail and gold strikes in Montana and Idaho saw white settlers arrive in these lands. One popular route saw miners and gold travel through Idaho from the mine fields south to Salt Lake City. New settlements cropped up in between, in places like today's Clark County. Recently, the county made headlines after suspicious remains were found near the small city of Dubois. Professor Turi King is joining Rod to try and solve one of the county's oldest murder cases.
The town was founded in 1892. I suppose it's not really that old, but it really does feel like you step back in time. It feels like cowboy country.
Together, they'll be based out of their incident room, a museum in a former church just a few miles from where the victim was found.
This is known as the Clark County John Doe. The case actually starts way back in 1979. So there's a family in a local cave, and they come across this torso. So no arms, no legs. It had basically dried out, so it was mummified.
Okay. So we actually have not only a murder, but a dismemberment.
Yeah.
And a decapitation.
It takes a lot for someone to dismember a body.
The crime scene is a hidden cave, known only to locals and artifact hunters, likely seeking ancient arrowheads left by Native Americans.
How bodies are disposed of and left at a crime scene can tell you a lot about the victim. For instance, if a body's been moved or somehow altered, you know, maybe somebody's trying to manufacture a crime scene or conceal a crime.
So this is the cave that the torso was found in.
Bart May, the county's recently retired sheriff, leads the way.
Watch your step as we go down through here. It's a little bit slick. It gets pretty dark too. Feel the temperature change.
Yeah, sort of a natural refrigeration, huh?
Stays this temperature all year long, winter, summer, it never changes. I think that's kind of why everything's preserved the way it was.
Yeah, there's really no decomposition at that point.
So this is where the torso was found, right here in this hole.
In 1979, the torso was uncovered by an 11-year-old girl, allegedly hunting for arrowheads.
These are the reports that were written by sheriff's offices to everything that was done up to this time.
Okay, there was clothing on the body as follows. Blue pinstripe shirt, maroon wool sweater, black wool pants. Wow. I think that in itself kind of dates it.
Yeah, I do too.
The fabric of the clothing suggested the victim had been killed sometime around the 1920s. But without a head or the limbs, no one knew who the victim was.
And of course, they dug down just as deep as they could, thinking the head and the arms and legs and all that would be right here too. They would dig till they hit rock, and then they'd move to the next spot over and just kind of did a grid search all the way through here. Never did find anything else other than that torso.
Wow.
With no ID, the victim was recorded as a John Doe case that seemed unlikely to ever be solved.
So then years went by. I always wondered just what happened with the rest of the body, and that went.
Then, 12 years later, in 1991, a second artifact hunter made another gruesome discovery.
About 25, 30 yards from here, further in the cave, he sees these arms and they're sticking up out of the ground.
Wow.
A lot like the torso, they're still very well preserved. Still had clothing on the arms and that, which matched up to the clothing that was on the torso.
The hands were sent to the FBI for fingerprinting, but they were unable to get answers. The victim was still seeming impossible to ID.
Do you think the head is here? Do you think it's even here?
I don't think the head's here.
Yeah.
I think that the rodents and that have probably packed it off.
Right, right. Anything else?
The arms and the legs and that were individually wrapped in burlap bag.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
This small detail reminds Rod of a previous case he worked back home in Louisiana.
There was a guy that did it in Shreveport. He cut this lady up and put her body parts in trash bags.
And in that case, there wasn't just one victim.
He killed, I want to say it was 3 girls.
The similarity is leading Rod towards a first suspect.
I think it takes a lot to destroy a body like that. So the question is, was there a serial killer working in the area? Someone that has a really depraved mind that wants to mutilate and destroy bodies.
Turi is hopeful forensics can provide the answer. Her first stop is Idaho State University, where the remains are stored.
This case does feel a little bit different. So this is somebody who could be within living memory of someone who's alive today. And that makes it feel that little bit more personal.
She's hoping Dr. Samantha Blatt, who recently re-examined the remains, might have some answers. The initial analysis indicated that the victim was a Caucasian male, but there was no obvious cause of death.
There were no particular markings on the torso that suggested, the individual was stabbed or anything like that. There was nothing recorded about the organs or any other soft tissue.
To obtain evidence from the bones, they needed to be cleaned.
And so a couple things happened. First was the long boiling process, actually taking flesh off of the torso. Then we used dermestid beetles which will eat decomposing tissue for the limbs afterward.
Now, with a defleshed skeleton, the forensic search for evidence could begin.
There is dismemberment on both the humera at the mid shafts. As well as both femora at mid shaft. And there is a decapitation right there on the 6th cervical vertebra. So that would have been that inch above the shoulder.
Yeah, where they've removed the head.
Yeah. We also cannot know if he was alive at the time of the dismemberment. It could have been killed by decapitation, or decapitation came afterward. There's not really a way to know from what we actually see here.
Frustratingly, the remains do not reveal the cause of death. And without a skull, discovering the victim's identity is all the more difficult.
How old was he?
Anywhere from 25 to 50 years old, which is not terribly helpful, but that's unfortunately typical when we're looking at adult remains.
With the victim's precise identity still a mystery, Rod is exploring the theory that this might have been the work of a serial killer. He's hoping to find other cases with similar details.
Very rarely you'll get those cases where you have some psychopath, that does serial killing, but even they have a type. They may kill all women, or they may kill all men, or they may kill within their own ethnic background. So I'm gonna search for dismemberment from 1905 to 1964.
For once, this 20th century case offers Rod an unusual source of evidence. Newspapers from the time.
So I'm gonna read through these to see if I can see any similarities.
With 25 results, the possibility of a stranger attack by a serial killer seems plausible.
So there's a woman that was found dismembered in Denver. Body parts of an unknown man scattered. A New York guy had a missing head. So there's not a lot here to suggest that there's some sort of serial killer operating in the area. Yeah, I think ruling out a serial killer is probably the thing to do.
With suspect number 1 a dead end, the chances of the murderer being someone the victim knew now seem more likely. Turi knows her specialty, genetics, can be a way to identify the victim and the murderer.
Ordinarily, what you do in cases such as this is you take DNA from the individual and you're trying to match it against DNA databases that are held for missing people.
Scientists were able to extract DNA from the victim's bones, but records only go back to 1984. So a new method has emerged.
And it is called investigative genetic genealogy.
Today, some 26 million people have submitted DNA tests to genealogy websites. This means scientists can now match some of those DNA records with unidentified individuals who might be related to them.
And that allows you to start to work out who this individual might be.
After scientists sent the victim's DNA to a lab, genetic genealogist Anthony Redgrave became involved in the case.
Anthony, what did you find out from the genetic genealogy?
Well, when we first started out, we were really surprised by how high some of these matches are.
The matches were strong, and there were many more than Anthony's team had ever seen.
And we kept seeing this happen.
Okay.
And I thought that I broke it. I actually thought that I'd broken the website because I was like, why is it saying that he's so old? This has never happened before.
But when they looked into who these matches were coming from, the data started to make sense.
What we found was that a lot of these genetic matches were related to pioneer ancestors of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
The Church of Latter-day Saints is often known as Mormonism. and was founded by Joseph Smith in 1830. By the 1850s, most Mormons were based in the area surrounding their headquarters in Salt Lake City. But after the completion of the Transcontinental Railway in 1869, the railroad spread north to states like Idaho. Mormons began populating the towns and cities along its route.
So his family were Mormon settlers then?
Yeah.
When Idaho became a state in 1890, around 1 in 5 of its inhabitants, almost 18,000 people, were Mormon. And it was this small population, combined with a particular Mormon practice, that led to Anthony having so many strongly related matches.
Because this was during the time of plural marriages.
Yeah.
So we were seeing that there were a lot of like half first and second cousins marrying each other because that was just who was available.
Yeah.
This intermarriage meant many individuals shared DNA with the victim.
And without knowing when he was born or when he died, it's basically a logic puzzle.
The only way to solve the puzzle was to work backwards to find the ancestral couple to whom all these people were related, and then trace their descendants.
As we kept adding more and more matches, eventually it only gave us one place to look, which was a child of Joseph Jackson Lovelace and Sarah Jane Scriggins.
The couple had 8 children. The victim must be one of the 4 sons. The only problem? They all had recorded death dates.
So we kept pouring back over and over and over all these brothers to try to figure out what's going on here.
One researcher matched the records with their graves.
At some point, one of the people on the team said, hey, this headstone doesn't have a death date carved on it. One of our researchers actually called the Payson City, Utah cemetery and said, hey, is there anyone buried in this plot? And they called back and they said no.
So he's got a gravestone, but no one's ever been buried there.
Yes.
So you're pretty sure you had your guy at this point. What was his name?
Joseph Henry Lovelace.
The clerical error had hidden a breakthrough.
So the body in the cave was Joseph Henry Lovelace.
Yes. Absolutely.
Lovelace, dismembered and dumped in a cave with no love at all. The unidentified torso is now an individual with a traceable history.
Born 3rd December 1870, which is significantly earlier than any of us expected.
Married to Agnes in 1896, and living in Soda Springs, Idaho in 1910.
We have them in the 1910 census, right here. And he's a stable man at a hotel barn, so he's taking care of people's horses while they're at the hotel.
Joseph and Agnes also have 4 children. But Anthony's research wasn't done.
The thing that we crave when we're doing this is just like putting a name to a face, especially when we're dealing with somebody whose head was never found, so we wanted to know what he looked like.
But no photos of Joseph Lovelace exist. So Anthony composited a photo-fit face from photos of Lovelace's relatives.
And what I ended up getting was this.
Anthony has made an educated guess with this portrait. Whatever he looked like, the dismembered body's identity has now been revealed. After more than a century as Joseph Henry Lovelace. However, his death is now even more puzzling. What led to a family man from a Mormon faith like Lovelace being murdered and dumped in a cave?
What we know is we have got Joseph Henry Lovelace, about age 40, red jumper, lots of blood staining on, and that would make sense because he's been dismembered. There's not much at the moment, but we now know it's probably around the 1910s. Obviously, the other cases we've been looking at have been fairly ancient. This is relatively recent. Do you think that's going to make it easier?
Makes it a lot easier.
Rod's been a homicide detective for 14 years and has never wanted to do anything else.
I think the part of the investigation is the rush that you get when you work it. I mean, to be responsible for figuring out how somebody or why somebody was killed. But all these emotions are there, and it's a rush. It's a huge rush. And when you find out or you close a case, you look for that high again. It's incredibly addictive.
And it doesn't take long to pick up the trail in his latest case. Research shows the Lovelaces left Soda Springs and traveled over 130 miles to a large Mormon community in Burley, still 200 miles south of Dubois, where Joseph Henry's body was eventually found. Even today, there is a large Mormon community in Burley, and while they no longer practice polygamy, most still abstain from alcohol, as they did in 1909, when Burley became a dry county. But it seems like Lovelace may have strayed from his parents' faith. Newspaper reports show he'd become a bootlegger, someone involved in selling illegal moonshine. To find out what a bootlegger's life in Burley was like, Rod's meeting historian Dr. Hope Benedict in the county's museum, which has a replica of a century-old frontier house.
Wow.
Yes. Home sweet home.
So is this what it would have been like for Lovelace back in his day?
I think it would have been pretty close, given the circumstances under which Lovelace lived.
We know that Lovelace was into bootlegging. Was there a point where bootlegging was an issue?
Well, it was certainly a way to make some extra money. Especially, it sounds like he needed to make extra money as he moved around. And that might have been one of the reasons why he was moving around.
With alcohol laws legislated at county level, wet and dry counties sometimes bordered each other, creating opportunities for the enterprising bootlegger.
So you kind of had a mixture between dry and wet counties.
Yes, it was a complete mix-mash. So you could be a bootlegger 10 miles from where you live, and you could actually be drinking or selling liquor legally 10 miles down the road.
Right.
Burley in Cassia County was dry in 1914. But just across the Snake River, Hayburn in Minidoka County was wet.
Well, that kind of puts things in perspective for me, because when I think of bootleggers, I think of, Al Capone and, the 20s. And the reality is that during that time, it was just kind of a quick way to make money from jumping from county to county.
For a man like Lovelace, with a wife and 4 children, the temptation was just too strong.
So today, it's almost the same when it comes to marijuana, or it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good analogy.
Named after the practice of hiding bottles, bootlegging was carried out by organized gangs and enterprising individuals. Reports of Lovelace carrying a suitcase of booze suggest he was more of a runner than a mastermind.
Unfortunately, it would probably be easier to be caught in a place like this with a small population. Henry Lovelace has a suitcase. We know what's in it.
There. Right. We have an article here where Henry Lovelace decided that he was going to throw his alcohol into the river. Yes, he saw the police were behind him, and he dumped it.
Lovelace was finally behind bars. But prison wasn't to his liking.
I think if he was a dangerous criminal and he broke out of jail, there'd be this huge manhunt for him. But now it's kind of like, no, don't go look for him. We don't want him back.
Yes, they didn't consider him a danger to society, pretty clearly.
But while the police were relaxed about Lovelace's bootlegging, it was still a dangerous activity, as Hope knows from her own family history.
My family probably won't really appreciate my saying this, but my grandfather was a bootlegger from about 1916 through much of the 20s. So he would haul it in from Montana, pick up his cache of alcohol, and then drive into Idaho. Well, this night, he drives up, pulls into the cash area, and sure enough, there is somebody else's liquor. And he thought, aha. So he loaded that onto his truck in addition to the liquor that he already had, and he started up the hill. The other car, full of bootleggers, gets down, realizes their alcohol's gone, turns around and starts chasing my grandfather up the hill. And they were shooting at him, according to the story. And my grandfather flew off the other side, of course, and lost them.
Hope's grandfather's story had a happy ending. But Lovelace's past as a bootlegger is already leading Rod to another potential suspect.
You know, where we are thus far with Lovelace, we know that he was murdered. We know that he lived a lifestyle that wasn't necessarily upright. And he was around probably a rough group of people. Someone could have felt like he's taken their money. Someone could have felt like he'd taken their alcohol. There are a lot of things that put him in danger. A plausible explanation for his death could be somebody from the underworld.
After 1914, Joseph Lovelace's bootlegging exploits don't feature in the press again. But there are reports that he and his wife Agnes moved north from Burley, finally ending up in Dubois, Clark County.
I think now that I've learned about Lovelace's bootlegging, I want to know how he ended up so far north in Dubois, dead. That's a big question.
Today, Dubois is a small city with a population of around 600 people or less. But in 1915, it was growing fast, and new residents, like the Lovelaces, would have had to live in tents before building houses. To find out more, Rod and Turi have come to talk to the town's historian, Bonnie Stoddard. Bonnie is 91 and has lived in Dubois for 85 years.
So when Lovelace arrived here and they moved to a tent, was that common?
At that time, they were still homesteading a lot of this area. And there was a lot of people that's coming in as homesteaders.
The 1862 U.S. Homestead Act allowed any family to be given 160 acres of government-owned land. New territories like Idaho, opened up by the railroad, were ripe for exploration. And Dubois was no exception.
Okay, the railroad come through Dubois in about 1879.
As an important stop for the railway, the town grew quickly. The prospect of work on the railroad or on the surrounding ranches attracted a constant stream of settlers staking their claim for land in this new frontier town.
See all the homesteads out in there?
Oh, yeah.
But with desert conditions and an altitude more than 5,000 feet above sea level, it was a tough place to settle.
The winters were very harsh. I've seen it be 40 below, and I couldn't imagine him living in a tent, especially with little kids. I think Lovelace had to ask a lot of his family just to live here.
And as Bonnie has discovered, theirs was a brutal life.
Our county group had decided to put together a history book, and I came across this story of the murder in Dubois.
Woman is murdered, husband suspected.
The woman's name? Mrs. Charles Smith. But as the newspapers reveal soon after the incredibly violent murder, this name is an alias. And Mrs. Smith is actually Agnes Lovelace, Joseph Henry's wife.
So we now have two murders.
Joseph Henry Lovelace and his wife.
Most people who commit domestic violence resort to it because they can't maintain a functional relationship with conversation, intimacy, and growing. They lose control because they can't control that person. And when that person maybe finds it elsewhere or decides they want to leave, that person kills them.
Apparently, she went to the dance and she was told not to go. And she went anyway.
He approached her bed after she returned home from a dance and split her head open with an axe.
The attack was so violent that reports say she was almost beheaded.
Murder is a very intimate crime, which means the person closest to the victim is the person you're going to look at. I mean, who would want to kill this man's wife but the husband?
So if Mrs. Charles Smith was really Agnes Lovelace, who killed her? Bonnie has a poster for the wanted man.
Oh, wow. Okay, so wanted for murder.
At first glance, he could be Lovelace.
Aged about 40 years.
By 1916, Joseph Lovelace would have been 46. And the similarities don't end there.
Height about 5'8" or 9 inches.
It was a height range of 5'5" to 6'1".
Dark brown hair.
There was pubic hair and there were arm hairs, and they were determined to be like a reddish brown color.
Red sweater.
Maroon wool sweater.
But Rod knows to accuse someone of murder, you need hard evidence.
Do you believe that the man in the cave is the man who murdered Agnes?
I really do. I think he's Lovelace.
The only problem with Bonnie's theory is that the man on the wanted poster is not called Lovelace or even Smith, but Walt Cairns. Bootleggers like Lovelace were known to use fake names. So the question now is whether this was a made-up name by Lovelace or was a different man entirely.
Could Joseph Lovelace and Smith and Walter Cairns be the same person?
Apparently so. When you stop and think about it.
Yeah.
Could Lovelace, the murder victim, really have killed his wife like Bonnie says? With nothing but confusion surrounding Agnes's murder, it's time to take stock at the incident room. Turi has found reports showing that a man was actually arrested for the crime.
The person who's arrested for Agnes's murder is known as Walt Cairns.
But within days of being jailed at St. Anthony, he escapes from the courthouse. Assuming that Walt Cairns was an alias used by Lovelace, and he was suspected of killing his wife, could that have made him a target for someone seeking their own form of justice?
In May 1916, there was strong talk of a lynching. So you can see how it might be thought that Joseph Henry Lovelace escapes from jail in St. Anthony, comes back here, is killed, and then put in the cave.
It's a possibility that's leading Rod to his third suspect.
It's possible that someone could have believed that Lovelace killed Agnes and wanted to sort of exact revenge for Agnes's death. I think revenge murders are very present. people want to avenge who they love or who they're loyal to.
In 1916, in remote areas like this, policing was still becoming formalized, and vigilante justice was not unusual. The horrific murder of an innocent woman would have shocked and angered the local community. It may have led them to take the law into their own hands, organize a posse, track down the killer, and deal with him in any way they saw fit.
Maybe an angry mob, maybe townspeople, family members. It could be anybody that wanted to avenge her death.
But the revenge killer theory depends on whether the man who was arrested for Agnes's murder, called Walt Cairns, was in fact an alias for Joseph Henry Loveless. Rod is wary of jumping to conclusions.
I think what troubles me is we have a lot of speculation and a little bit of imagination.
Bonnie's convinced that Walter Cairns and Loveless are the same people. I'm not so convinced. I like something a little more concrete, you know, something that can support not only the accusation or the theory, but something that can actually prove something to be true.
Clark County has fewer than 900 residents. Murder is rare. And so are cops. But in the hope of finding concrete evidence, Rod has tracked down the current sheriff, John Clements.
Now, once you guys had found out that the guy in the cave was actually Loveless, who do you think may have killed him?
My theory is he murdered his wife. And his escape coincides timeline, everything with when her family would have arrived to get her remains.
The sheriff suspects Loveless was busted out of jail by Agnes's family or friends and then killed as revenge. But there's no hard evidence so far that it was actually Loveless in jail at all.
It's really important to know exactly who committed a murder. The accusation changes lives, and to do that, I think you probably need some real evidence. To be able to point to this person actually being identified as the same person is the key to the entire case. I want to be able to find something that actually says Walter Cairns is indeed Joseph Loveless.
Based off everything I can find, the most probable, logical answer is they're one and the same. To say there's a direct link that absolutely says without a question, there isn't one.
Right. I think one of the most fascinating things about ancient murders is that the most crucial evidence is always the evidence that's missing.
Even without evidence that Cairns and Loveless are one and the same, the idea that the victim found in a cave might also have been a murderer has become a big news story, with much of the world's media reporting it as fact. But Rod thinks they're wrong.
I think what's really interesting is all these websites have the same story. It says DNA evidence identifies man who killed his wife. They call him an axe murderer. It's just a story that's just caught on fire. You know, someone made a story and everyone else just copied it. And I think that's what's so disturbing about this.
I think the basic human right is justice. And I think if you're able to provide justice to a person, whether dead or alive, you've succeeded. That's your mission, that's your purpose.
In this case, justice for the Lovelaces might be hard to find. The investigation has thrown up 3 suspects: a serial killer, a rival bootlegger, and a revenge killer. But none of them add up for Rod.
I just don't see it. This case has the tone of something completely different.
It's never what people think. People kill people that are close to them. Personal, intimate relationships, love, marriage, love triangles, that probably is the majority of murders that are ever worked.
We have a lot of evidence, but yeah, a lot of conjecture.
A lot. The problem is none of it fits, and all of it is circumstantial.
In a case that feels like it's on the shifting sands of rumor, science can offer solid ground.
There's so many sort of strands of sort of scientific evidence that you can bring to remains. You know, what are the marks on the bones? What's the sort of weapon that would make that sort of mark? And how does that fit in with what we know about the victim at the time?
A closer look at the injuries could reveal how Lovelace was killed, and perhaps the type of person who killed him. Dr. Amy Michael is a biological anthropologist and an expert on trauma.
We can't tell how Lovelace died, but what does the trauma tell us about what happened to him?
You know, in this case, the trauma was not the slam dunk, but it does give us some interesting post-mortem information. And so there are a number of clues here. We do see cuts on the two largest bones of the leg, the femur, and then also on the humerus. And you can see the perpetrator chose to go right through the midshaft for the most part on both of those bones.
Now that strikes me as odd.
Certainly, going through the joints would be a lot easier. You're not cutting through bone, you're cutting through cartilage and tissues, of course. But I don't know if we're dealing with a perpetrator who knew much about anatomy, because certainly this was difficult to do.
The killer was no skilled butcher or surgeon, and more details of what happened during Lovelace's dismemberment are soon revealed.
There's some striations on the inside of one of the bones.
What we're seeing here is very indicative of like a saw used by hand. So as the perpetrator is moving that saw through the bone, it's going to leave those striations on the cortex of the bone like that.
Yeah.
The striations say something else, too.
Well, it's pretty apparent that he was on his back and the cuts were coming anterior to posterior.
With his leg being sawed from the top to the middle before snapping.
So this would be the front of the thigh here, and the blade was moving through this way.
Well, he's on his back. And presumably he's face up and they can see his face.
Yeah, that would be a very disturbing image, right?
Finally, the trauma markings reveal one more piece of evidence.
So if you hand me that distal femur right there. So it looks quite different. We get some fracturing.
That's
blunt force trauma, something like that.
So this could be an axe?
Sure. An axe makes a chopping wound.
An axe? The exact same weapon used to kill the victim's wife, Agnes. Could the same killer be responsible for both of their deaths? Could it be that Lovelace never had this alias at all, and in fact the killer was a real person known as Walt Cairns who knew the victims well?
What's really come across to me is how much somebody would have really wanted to do it, to actually take the time to do that.
Turi is searching for evidence of a real person called Walt Cairns. But beyond the newspaper reports, there don't seem to be any records anywhere.
Rather frustratingly, I've gone through the records, and at the moment, I can't find anyone. So that's a bit of a dead end, it looks like, at the moment.
Despite no definite proof Walt Cairns existed, Rod is convinced that his instincts about the case are correct.
Homicide investigations are based on hunches and instinct and faith. Where I am not very good at other things, I recognize that that is something that I'm very good at. But I can't rely on it alone. So I need validation from things that would corroborate that.
Having worked on over 250 murders as a homicide detective, Rod's confident he's reached a conclusion to this case.
Our victim is Joseph Henry Lovelace.
So he's got a gravestone, but no one's ever been buried there.
Yes.
He was some sort of bootlegger. He was married to Agnes Lovelace. What we do know is Joseph Henry Lovelace was not a violent man.
They didn't consider him a danger to society.
So to draw a conclusion that somehow he became a crazy killer and started chopping his wife's head off with an axe is a stretch. Usually when you see cases where husbands kill wives, it's a little bit more than the fact that she went out dancing.
Rod believes that Agnes's love life might have been complicated.
I believe that Joseph Henry Lovelace was killed in the middle of some love triangle. It's not unreasonable to think that that blew up into something violent, and her lover killed Joseph Henry Lovelace with an axe.
That's blunt force trauma, something like that.
You can almost infer that it's the same weapon. The fact that Agnes's head is almost severed from her body, the fact that Joseph Henry Lovelace didn't have a head, those types of similarities are not just that coincidental.
Rod has decided it's most likely that a man calling himself Walt Cairns murdered Joseph Henry Lovelace, and then did the same to Agnes.
It's something that happens all the time. It's nothing new. It's nothing that's out of the realm of possibility. It's something that's actually quite common when it comes to relationships that are estranged.
And for Rod, this 100-year-old case, nearly 2,000 miles away from his hometown, couldn't be more personal. When Rod was 3 years old, his own mother was shot to death by her new husband.
My mother was killed for the same exact reason. You know, there was a man who wanted to possess her. He wanted to control her, didn't want her to be with any other man. It's not love. It's about possession. It's about control.
Having started the case with a John Doe torso, the science has unearthed Lovelace's extraordinary life and times.
This has been a really engrossing case. We've had an absolute ton of evidence and really fascinating because it feels really recent.
Rod's experience has led him to a conclusion that flies in the face of the story that is spread around the world.
I believe that justice has to be served at all costs. But you have to kind of stick to your convictions. To determine somebody's guilty before you have actually proved it, that's a miscarriage of justice.
And in a community that was haunted by these two unsolved murders, the truth matters.
Justice is probably the only thing that people have. And for someone not to receive it, God, it ruins generations. When my mother's killer wasn't prosecuted, the injustice of that kind of devastated my grandparents, which in turn devastated my brother, who ended up committing a murder. So I think that's, it has a ripple effect. It changes the identity of people. So I think murder is about one person committing a murder, but I think someone being murdered is about everybody.